The President. Questions. Question 1, Mr. Michael Tan. There are comments pointing out that in recent years, false information has been spreading extremely fast on the internet, which has greatly affected public order and efforts for fighting the epidemic. In this connection, will the government inform this council, 1, of the existing legislation that can combat false information in a targeted manner? Apart from making clarifications, what other means that the government has employed to cope with false information? 2, apart from the false information disseminated openly on the internet, how the government combats false information disseminated on a one-to-one group or group basis through the social media or mobile communication applications? And 3, of the plans put in place by the government to improve the situation of proliferation of false information. Secretary for Security. President, while the rapid development of information technology has brought convenience to the public, it has also led to or aggravated invasions of personal privacy or disruptions to social order. The internet and social media are fraught with doxing, hate speech, discriminatory remarks, and false information. These inappropriate and untruthful information not only confuses the public, but also purposefully divides society, incites hatred, provokes discontent, and compromises public order and national security. We must address this problem seriously and squarely. In consultation with the Home Affairs Bureau, HAB, our consolidated reply to the members' questions is as follows. Government Policy Bureau and departments have been paying close attention to rumors and fake news on the internet. On finding any erroneous information circulating widely, they will immediately come forth to clarify through various channels with a view to stopping the spread of rumors and easing public concerns. Apart from using traditional media channels, including press conferences and press releases, directors of bureau and secretaries of departments have been making use of different opportunities, example, attending television and radio programs or meeting the press after attending public events, to deliberate on related policies and clarify truthful reports in person. Also, the government has been actively making use of the internet and social media such as the Brand Hong Kong webpage, the TMHK, and the social media pages of different departments to disseminate information to the public directly and make clarifications. As for unfounded information about Hong Kong circulating overseas, the government will reach out to overseas media and foreign government agencies concerned to clarify and arrange meetings with consuls general, chambers of commerce, and related bodies in Hong Kong to explain and respond so as to minimize the negative impact brought by such disinformation. Apart from dealing with rumors proactively, the government also seizes various opportunities and takes the initiative to disseminate the most up-to-date information to the public, such as by launching thematic short videos and contacting media organizations to arrange for featured interviews and follow-up reporting so that the public can have the most accurate and comprehensive information. Since mid-February 2022, Radio Television Hong Kong's TV32 has also become the government's dedicated channel and platform for disseminating the latest anti-epidemic information to the public. The internet is not an unreal world that is beyond the law. As far as the existing legislation in Hong Kong is concerned, most of the laws enacted to prevent crimes in the real world are, in principle, applicable to the online world, including social media and mobile communication softwares. Even though there is not yet any legislation against fake news in Hong Kong, various provisions are in place under the existing legal framework to deal with the dissemination of inappropriate information. Any acts that incite others to break the law, as long as they involve criminal offences, are regulated by the relevant laws, regardless of whether they are committed online or not. For example, Section 24 concerning criminal intimidation, Sections 9 and 10 concerning offences relating to seditious intention of the crimes ordinance, as well as Section 23 concerning blackmail, Section 16A concerning fraud, and Section 17 concerning obtaining property by deception of the theft ordinance are applicable to online acts too. Making inappropriate speech online may also result in the commission of other offences, such as contravention of the data protection principles under the Personal Data Privacy Ordinance, infringement of intellectual property rights or libel. Application for injunction order can also be made to the High Court as and when necessary. During the fifth wave of the epidemic, some members of the public claimed to have tested positive for COVID-19 on social platforms. They flagrantly breached quarantine requirements and advocated COVID-19 patients to go around the city to spread the virus. Such inappropriate speech was made with an intention to undermine the government's anti-epidemic work. Police will not tolerate such acts and will certainly take appropriate enforcement action. As at the 30th of April 2022, 19 persons were arrested for inciting others to violate anti-epidemic measures, inciting others to vandalize government anti-epidemic facilities, or disseminating false anti-epidemic messages. Under the existing legal framework, there are also mechanisms for removing inappropriate messages. For instance, the PDPO empowers the Privacy Commissioner for Personal Data to demand cessation of disclosure of doxing contents, while the Crimes Ordinance allows the court, having regard to the circumstances, to order the defendant or any other person to remove, delete, or destroy any intimate image published without consent. Noticing the circulation of inappropriate messages on the internet, police will actively investigate the matter and take enforcement action in a timely manner. They will also require service providers to remove the messages as appropriate. For the reasons stated above, members of the public have to act legally and responsibly when using the internet. The government will take stringent enforcement action against any person making inappropriate speech online that involves criminal elements. HAB is considering the experience and methods of other countries and regions in tackling fake news and false information. HAB has already commissioned a consultancy to study legislation enacted in overseas jurisdictions in recent years for regulating disinformation and provide recommendations regarding the ensuing legislative work. The laws of different places vary in terms of their legislative intent, application, and execution. The topic of false information covers a wide range of issues. Not an instance has been found around the world where issues from distribution of fake news, online false statements, to false information for election manipulation can be collectively tackled by one single piece of legislation. In the above study, reference will be made to the legislation and enforcement experience of different countries and regions with a view to working on a set of effective legal regulatory proposals appropriate to the local situation. Thank you. Mr. Michael Tian. Secretary, you said 19 persons were arrested involving 3 incidents, but how many were arrested for false information? I think you were too embarrassed to mention that. That's why you just quoted other figures. Do you know how much fake false news was or false information was circulating every month, and arresting 19 persons mean nothing? Now, the problem, of course, has been around, but in the past year and a half, it's become a more pressing issue because every 2 days or so, there's the rumors circulating about lockdown of the city, causing panic among the public. And then there was also false information about the collection of DNA of people for sending to the mainland, and so people resented testing. So maybe can you look at the experience of France? Now they have law against false information in relation to relation. Can we also enact legislation against false information in relation to the epidemic? Then the scope will be much smaller and it will be much easier and quicker to enact relevant legislation, because later on someone may say that you are going to tighten the circuit breaker mechanism, then people will be scrambling to buy air tickets, and then there will also be panic buying of other daily necessities if rumors spread around. So you just have to keep clarifying it. That's not good enough. Secretary, I mentioned 19 persons arrested in relation to false information relating to the epidemic. But of course, the total number of persons arrested for false information is far higher. But then they are not arrested under one particular piece of legislation. That's why we don't have a total figure of on the number of persons arrested for false information. And then we have invoked sections 9 and 10 of the crimes ordinance to arrest many people in relation to the dissemination of false information. Now, on whether we will legislate against false information, for the time being, we believe we could rely on other pieces of legislation to deal with that. Perhaps the Home Affairs Bureau could also supplement on other points. Under Secretary for Home Affairs, well, thank you. The HAB is now studying the situation in Hong Kong to see how we could target the dissemination of fake news or false information. We are looking at specific proposals on legislative arrangement and enforcement. We have engaged a consultancy team to look at the experiences around the world that covers Europe, America, and Asia, so 3 continents. In Europe, we'll make reference to the practices in the EU, UK, France, and Germany. And then in Asia, we'll look at the mainland, Malaysia, Singapore, Japan, and then for the America, we will also refer to the experience in the USA. As for the case mentioned by Mr. Michael Chen about France, yes, France does have a piece of legislation, but that is specific to deal with false information in relation to election. Is not false information in general, so that law is limited in a way. Now, our consultants have already completed 2 reports. We hope that by the middle of the year, we are able to complete all the reports and that we could come up with concrete proposals. Thank you. Mr. Ronick Chen. Thank you, President. On dealing with false information, the government must respond more quickly and be able to take actions more quickly. The HAB believes that we can only deal with it through legislation, but in the UK they have a rapid response unit to respond to disinformation. They make use of machine learning and other analytics tool, and then throughout the day they could monitor such the disinformation, and then they could then identify the disinformation early and tackle them. So before you decide to legislate, would you make reference to the practice of the UK? Would you set up a rapid response unit in the government to tackle disinformation in a targeted manner? Thank you. Secretary. Well, I thank Mr. Chen for his suggestion that we must act swiftly to disinformation, because when false information shapes people's mind, or before this information does so, we have to tell people the truth. Now, of course, we have different units. For example, the Information Services Department, it is monitoring on real-time basis information on social media platforms, so we know what's going on in the community and we know if there's any disinformation circulating. And then we have the cyber crime unit and so on, and other cyber security units, and they will also be monitoring whether there's any circulation of disinformation. So there are various mechanisms now to identify inappropriate information, and if there's need to clarify, we do so at once. And then we'll see whether this information involves criminal elements, or even if it's just about the need to respond to disinformation in general, we have a mechanism in place to deal with that. And then we also make use of big data, artificial intelligence, and softwares available in the market to help us with analysis of information. So we want to be able to identify this information early and then, remove it as soon as possible, or cut the chain of circulation as soon as possible. Mr. Jimmy, well, I think this information is also almost beyond control. There's a recent fake news incident, and our chief executive-elect, Mr. John Lee, suffered. Now, last week when Mr. John Lee made his victory speech, he said, it made him realize that how much he loves Hong Kong and country. But then someone tried to distort his meaning to say that Hong Kong has become a country. And this is a serious matter. Now, I know that the government is now doing consultancy study, but do you have a specific timetable as to when we could legislate against this information? That's the first point. Secondly, for the Information Services Department and other government departments, how many units are involved in the clarifying information on social media? How many social media platforms do they make use of? Would they just resort to social media platforms coming among older people but not among the younger people? Secretary, I will respond to part of the questions, and then the Secretary for Home Affairs will answer the question on legislation. Now, about misleading news reports, I believe most in the media organizations are professional, but then, of course, there are a handful who are exceptions. I was a victim myself, and what I said was distorted, and then I had to clarify it, clarify relevant news report. So for such misleading news reporting, first, we have to rely on the professional ethics of of reporters. And the second thing is that we have to come out and clarify matters as soon as possible. Of course, we could we have to make use of various channels that say traditional channels that could reach some of the community, and then for others who are tech savvy, we have to have channels to reach them too. So we use a multi-pronged approach and even a creative approach. Hopefully then we could reach out to as many people in the community as possible. Thank you. Secretary for Home Affairs. Thank you, President. On targeting this information, we're not just considering the legislative angle. There are other administrative means that we could resort to as well. We keep an open mind, but on the whole, we are sparing no effort to target and curb this information. Now, the consultancy started on the 23rd of November last year. There are 4 phases. The first phase, for the first phase, the report's completed. That is analyzing the impact on society because of this information and where there are inadequacies in regulation in Hong Kong. And the second phase of the report looks at the reference legislation and experience of enforcement in 8 jurisdictions. I mentioned already those countries. The third phase of the report is about collecting views of stakeholders on the subject. The fourth phase, or the final phase of the report, is to consolidate all the previous findings and then come up with the best proposal. So after we have received the reports, of course, we'll study them carefully and then we'll follow up on them as soon as possible. Thank you. Mr. Tang Fei. Thank you, President. Secretary. Now, media information literacy education is very important. We have not yet legislated against fake news, but we all know the harm of fake news. In 2018, I think there was the Education Bureau came up with curriculum on media literacy education, but then unfortunately in 2018 we had the Black Cat riots, and that dealt a serious blow to the community, and now we're not seeing yet the effect of such education. So apart from law enforcement, would you work with the Education Bureau of the relevant government department so that in terms of the legal and technical education, and you could bring in more professional elements into the curriculum, and then there could be more publicity in the community? Thank you. Secretary, on fake news and disinformation, of course, law enforcement is one way. Other than that, we have to look at education and the mindset of the community as a whole, and that's important. And so it involves various sectors. For example, reporters must remain professional. They must clarify, they must confirm facts before they report anything. And then for other sectors, such as the education sector and so on, we should use various means to encourage people to have critical thinking and decide what is true and not. First of all, we must not disseminate false information, and when we receive any information, we must not spread it indiscriminately. So I think that's duty on every one of us in the community. And then also for false information, we must make clarification, but also we must condemn such false information. That's what the government must do. And then people will know that if you disseminate false information, people will criticize you. I think that's also important. Ms. Nixie Lam. Thank you, President. I'm sure you all remember that. Please clip your microphone to your lapel. Oh, sorry. I'm sure you all recall that during the 5th wave of the pandemic, the worst false news was a rumor that this council held a closed meeting, and then people panicked, and then they started to scramble for meat, vegetables, and so on. Now, for such rumors, how come it took more than half a day to clarify the information? So could there be a quicker way? Could you make improvement there? And do you have a KPI for that? For example, you would give out the right information within a certain time frame, and then people could rest assured. Thank you. Well, the allegation then was that there was a certain meeting held at the Legislative Council, so we left it to the Council to clarify the matter. It would be more appropriate. But of course, for any this information, it has to be clarified at the first instance. Ms. Elizabeth Quat. Thank you, President. Since 2019, I've been asking for the administration to legislate against false information. At the time, the government said it would start studying the matter, but then the Deputy Secretary is telling us, the Undersecretary is telling us that you're still just looking into that. Now, we know that false information spreads far and fast. It has serious impact on the community. So I hope the government will deal with the pressing issue more quickly. The Secretary mentioned that you'll be making better use of technology. I see in other cities, there's collaboration between the government and community organizations that use AI and big data to monitor the spread of false information online, especially the information that spreads quickly. So then the government could make clarifications at the first instance, and also the information could be kept on website, and people could check what the true information is. So it's not just about using government channels. It's also about using the community resources to fight this information. So would you consider working with local organizations or universities to set up a platform and tackle disinformation further? Secretary. President, thank you, member, for the question. I agree with the use of your technology is important, such as AI and big data. We note that in market there are such platforms. We'll keep an open mind. We'll see how we could strengthen our collaboration with such parties or make use of such platforms for clarifying information. On legislation, I'll defer to the Secretary for Home Affairs. Well, if we look at the experience around the world, we know there is not a single piece of legislation that could tackle all this information or dissemination of false information. But then if you sum up the experiences, well, there are just several issues. First, there has to be a need to identify false information. Second, we need to verify if the information is false. And third, we need to take action, which is usually swift removal of the information. And fourth is law enforcement. That means penalizing those who spread false information. Now, on working with the community, definitely we'll consider it. There are many universities and research organizations that could make a contribution to. Thank you.
Question 2, the Honorable Edmund Wong. President, in September last year, representatives of institutes of accountants and more than 150 accounting firms from Guangdong, Hong Kong, and Macau signed the Agreement on Development Strategies for the Accounting Profession in Guangdong, Hong Kong, and Macau, or the Agreement. Under the framework of the agreement, the signatories to the agreement from the three places will put emphasis on the comprehensive strengthening of cooperation in 5 areas, namely strengthening information sharing, advancing facilitation for cooperation, organizing personal exchanges, focusing on business development, deepening technological collaboration, so as to jointly serve the development of the Guangdong, Hong Kong, Macau, Greater Bay Area. In this connection, will the government inform this Council, 1, whether it has, in the light of the agreement, drawn up short, medium, and long-term plans to strengthen the exchanges and training for the talents in the accountancy sectors of the three places, and whether it will instruct the Financial Reporting Council to enhance its work in this regard after the Council's functions have been expanded. If so, of the details. If not, the reasons for that. And 2, as some members of the accountancy sector have relayed, that Hong Kong's accounting firms which have currently established offices on the mainland are mainly those of a larger scale, and they hope that more small and medium accounting firms of Hong Kong may develop their businesses on the mainland under the agreement. Whether the government will take measures to more proactively assist Hong Kong's small and medium accounting firms to developing their businesses on the mainland, such as providing them with funding support, if so, of the details, if not, the reasons for that. Secretary for Financial Services and the Treasury. Thank you, President. I thank the Honorable Edmund Wong for his question. My reply to the 2 parts of the question is as follows. On Hong Kong Macau affairs, as well as the development of Guangdong, Hong Kong Macau, Greater Bay Area, or GBA, the National 14th Five-Year Plan has highlighted the deepening of cooperation among Guangdong, Hong Kong, Macau on various fronts, promotion of coordinated regional economic development, development of a world-class metropolis, cluster with enhanced competitiveness. The accountancy sector plays an important role in the overall development of our country by supporting the high-quality development of various sectors such as finance, technology, and logistics in the GBA. The development of the GBA in turn drives the market demand for professional accounting services and provide ample room for accountancy sector to expand. Regarding the first part of the question, we welcome and support a positive interaction among the accountancy sectors in Guangdong, Hong Kong, Macau. The agreement on development strategies for the accounting profession in Guangdong, Hong Kong, Macau was signed by the Guangdong Institute of Certified Public Accountants, the Hong Kong Association of Registered Public Interest Entity Auditors, and the Union of Associations of the Professional Accountants of Macau on behalf of 151 accounting firms from the 3 places in September last year. The Financial Secretary also attended the signing ceremony to witness this important milestone achieved in respect of the cooperation and exchanges among the accountancy sectors of the 3 places. The agreement provides an important platform for the signatories to explore and develop under the existing policy framework of the 3 places a new cooperation mechanism for the profession. We support the section of the agreement relating to cooperation matters, which includes strengthening information sharing and personnel exchanges within the existing legal framework of the 3 places so as to better facilitate cooperation in the provision of professional services, expand the scope of business, and promote technological development of the accountancy and auditing sectors. We'll be pleased to follow up on the communication mechanism and cooperation programs to be developed under the agreement for the 3 places and to provide support when implementing our relevant policies and regulatory measures as appropriate. We also welcome suggestions from the local accountancy sector for us to conduct timely reviews on the local legal framework for conducting services to respond to the development needs of the sector. As for the second part of the question, we've long been supportive of the Hong Kong accountancy sector and business expansion in the mainland. In particular, on cooperation with Guangdong, we have secured the mainland's support in launching various measures to facilitate the provision of professional services by accountants in the mainland. Under the framework of the Agreement on Trade and Services of the Mainland and Hong Kong Closer Economic Partnership Arrangement, qualified Hong Kong accountants exempted from certain papers when sitting for the examination for certified public accountants or CPA in the mainland. In respect of the requirements to become partners of partnership accounting firms in the mainland, Hong Kong accountants who have obtained the Chinese CPA qualifications are given national treatment, which includes the explicit removal of the requirement that the right of control over mainland accounting firms should be held by mainland residents. Besides, when Hong Kong accountants apply for the practicing qualification in the mainland or apply to become partners of accounting firms in the mainland, the length of auditing experience that they have acquired in Hong Kong is considered equivalent to the length of auditing experience acquired in the mainland. In other words, the mainland rules and regulations have given Hong Kong accountants much room for business development in the mainland, benefiting accounting professionals and accounting firms of various sizes in Hong Kong. We encourage the sector to actively leverage the existing facilitation measures and seek to provide professional services in different ways in the mainland. On that basis, we're now pursuing with the mainland measures that it may further facilitate Hong Kong accountants' practice in GBA, including exploring with the Tianhai Authority the proposal to allow Hong Kong practicing CPAs without Chinese CPA practicing qualifications to become partners of accounting firms in Tianhai and engage in specific business or perform certain managerial functions, as well as including Hong Kong practicing CPAs in Tianhai's policies for high-end talents. Looking ahead, the regulatory regime for the accounting profession in Hong Kong will enter a new stage. The LegCo passed the Financial Reporting Council Amendment Bill 2021 in October last year to reform the accounting regulatory regime in Hong Kong. Under the new regime, the Accounting and Financial Reporting Council, or AFRC, is tasked to promote the development of the accountancy sector through effective regulation, and has been given under the ordinance a statutory function of promoting the development of the accounting profession. Meanwhile, we plan to submit to the Council a bill to amend the Professional Accountants Ordinance, which aims at enhancing the election mechanism of the Council of the Hong Kong Institute of Certified Public Accountants, so as to enhance the Council's professionalism and representation in facilitating the HKICPA's performance of its role under the new regulatory regime. We target to implement the new regulatory regime on the 1st of October this year. Thereafter, we will work with the AFRC, the HKICPA, and the accountancy sector to examine the professional issues faced by the sector, in particular the problems encountered with developing business. The mainland will jointly draw appropriate technical measures to address the issues and promote the professional exchange and development of the sectors in the GBA. Thank you. Ms. Edmund Wong. Thank you, President. I want to thank the Secretary for incorporating aspirations of the sector into the government's future direction. And the government is working with the Tianhai Authority on pilot measures for early implementation in Tianhai. I'd like to know the considerations on the part of the main authorities and also responses from our government. The Secretary said that our practicing CPAs would be included in Tianhai's policies for high-end talent. We have 47,000 accountants and 5,000 practicing CPAs in Hong Kong. There are many non-practicing CPAs. They want to develop in GBA as well as Tianhai in particular. So can non-practicing CPAs in Hong Kong be incorporated into Tianhai's policies for high-end talents, please? Secretary. I thank Mr. Wong for his question. Now, from a macro perspective, I'd like to explain why we want to promote our accountants to Tianhai. Now, if you expect the mainland to recognize all our CPAs, there are some challenges because the two places have different operations. Now, for examination, for instance, Hong Kong accountants can be exempted from certain papers in the practicing examination of CPA because there are papers on mainland laws and society in particular. After all, these accountants, if they are to practice in the mainland, must have certain understanding of the rules and regulations there. And we'll see how we can further enhance our cooperation with the mainland. As for Tianhai, we know that Tianhai is positioned to cooperate with Hong Kong, and then we have had a lot of exchanges and communication with the Tianhai authorities to understand their needs and how Hong Kong can mutually Hong Kong and Tianhai can have mutual cooperation and support, and see how we can serve the needs of the financial services sector in Tianhai. So we'll first discuss with Tianhai, and our professional accountants here can engage in specific business or perform certain managerial functions in Tianhai, and we hope that our practicing CPAs can be included in their policies for high-end talent because Tianhai is tasked to cooperate with Hong Kong, and whether we are looking at our needs or theirs, we should mutually benefit one another. So we are looking for cooperation opportunities in Tianhai. We'd like to know from the sector their needs. So there are two sides to a coin. We should not just focus on the challenges, but we should look at the opportunities and our strengths. We should see what their needs are, and we should leverage our own professional strengths. And since we are mutually agreeable, then we can then work on the details and implementation. Professor Nelson Lam, I'd like to thank the Secretary for his continuous support to the sector. I have to declare interest. I am one of the signatories in the capacity of an accounting firm. Now, we should expand our scope. If you just look at 151 accounting firms and 40,000 odd accountants. Now, first on the exchange of personnel and training. As we all know, things happen online nowadays. We may know that there are ample opportunities in GBA, but our concern is when we can resume a normal cross-boundary travel with the mainland. May I remind members that you can only ask one supplementary question, so please be seated. Oh, thank you. Secretary. Thank you, Professor Lam, for your question. I think there are common points in the two members' questions, and that is how we can deepen our cooperation in the mainland on for the accounting sector. Now, this is also our goal. With regard to 151 accounting firms, now the 151 accounting firms in these three places under the agreement, whether we want to enlarge the scope in terms of the number of firms included and also the scope of cooperation. Now we should look at how our strengths can fulfill the needs of the mainland, and that we can also work together to enlarge the professional market. Now, how we can help our accounting personnel. We have strived to ask for exemption from certain papers in the qualifying examination. And now we are also communicating with TMHK so that we can help to match Hong Kong practicing CPAs and also the firms in TMHK. So we do not just put in place these measures. We want to publicize these measures so that the sector can make good use of these measures. Thank you. Ms. Sarili, thank you. Hong Kong is a regional financial services financial center. It's important that we have sufficient talent. Secretary, you may be aware that many professionals have chosen to leave Hong Kong, and some of them are from the accounting sector. So on a promotion of professional development and recognition, I hope you can continue to work on this. DAB and myself are of the view that lawyers are far ahead of accountants when it comes to expansion into TMHK. Some lawyers in Hong Kong have set the qualifying examination for GBA. Now, we believe that the accounting sector can follow suit. Have you considered expanding the arrangement for TMHK to the whole of GBA, like the treatment given to the legal sector? Have you considered this possibility, Secretary? I would like to address Ms. Lee's question from two perspectives. First, what we have done to promote the development of talents in this sector. Now, first, the accounting sector has to strengthen itself. In 2020, the HK CIPA has restructured its professional training structure, and this has strengthened the profession as a whole. And under our new regulatory regime to be implemented on the 1st of October 2022, we have rationalized professional regulation and development under the new regime. And I believe we'll be in a better position to introduce new measures to strengthen the sector. Yes, the sector should enhance its own strength. We have also improved the regulatory regime, and we need to cooperate with the mainland. Now, apart from TMHK, we're thinking how we can allow our CPAs to facilitate our CPAs to sit for examination and to practice in the mainland. We have already sought exemption from certain papers. Well, some of the papers are hard to be exempted because they involve local laws, and practicing CPAs will have to be knowledgeable in these areas. And whether GBA qualification examinations for the legal sector can be a model for us as well. Now, I'm not too familiar with the legal profession, but I do understand the question by Ms. Lee, and in communicating with the mainland, we will see how we can promote the development of the sector in GBA, whether we're talking about qualifying examinations or recognition of the qualifications, the intention is to find more opportunities for our accounting sector. Thank you. Dr. Stephen Wong. Thank you, President. Thank you, Secretary. I'd like to ask for certain statistics to better understand the situation. Now, under CEPA, qualified CPAs can be exempted from certain papers in the qualifying examination in the mainland. I'd like to know the number of Hong Kong accountants that have obtained the Chinese CPA qualification. Dr. Wong, I'm afraid we can only ask one supplementary question at a time. Thank you. Now, the Hong Kong CPA and also the Chinese Institute of CPAs. Now, as at the 31st of January 2022, the number of successful cases stood at over 1,800. The HK CIPA believed that there will be a few hundreds of Hong Kong CPAs that will finally obtain the Chinese CPA qualification. Now, there are concerns as to of course, some may want to know the number of Hong Kong CPAs that ultimately become partners in mainland accounting firms or accounting firms that can develop their business in the mainland. Now, these are their commercial arrangements, and we do not have the concrete figures. Mr. Edmund Wong, I'd like to know how we can promote personnel exchange. Of course, young professionals should have the opportunities to work and have a feel for themselves in the mainland. So for personnel exchanges and also young accountants that have obtained the qualifications, to know whether there are plans for exchange between the two places. Secretary, Mr. Wong has made an excellent suggestion. It's not just about examination and also setting up their business. On the day-to-day work and sharing experience, these are also areas we should promote. We've got some plans, not just for exchange in the mainland, but for Hong Kongers that have been successful in the mainland. They should come back to Hong Kong and share their success experience with Hong Kong youngsters. So it's not just the hardware, such as obtaining qualifications and practicing there. Now, for the softer aspects, such as experience sharing, we are happy to cooperate with Mr. Edmund Wong. Professor Nelson Lam, regarding the second question, and that is subsidy, I don't think the accounting sector needs financial subsidy. Rather, our regulation has been transferred to the AFRC, and we have almost given up our self-regulatory system. So how can we crack down on those intermediaries? Yes, last year, with the support of members, we passed a bill, and that has confirmed that we should enhance our regulation. We will continue to exchange views of members. So it's not just about a regulation, but market development and talent training. We can cooperate. Thank you.
Question 3, Honorable Stanley Ng. Thank you, President. It is learned that since the outbreak of the fifth wave of COVID-19 epidemic, the supply of many essential livelihood commodities has been affected. This, coupled with rumors from time to time alleging that the government will enforce restrictions on people's movement or other measures, has caused panic in many members of the public, resulting in their snapping up and stockpiling food, medicines, and daily necessities, which led to a surge in prices for certain essential livelihood commodities. Some merchants have even taken advantage of this situation to inflate prices. In this connection, will the government inform this council one of the measures that the government has put in place since the emergence of an acute shortage of face masks in the first wave of the epidemic, to ensure that the supply and prices of anti-epidemic supplies, medicines, fresh food, and non-staple food are stable, and the measures in place to tackle the emergence of panic buying in the fifth wave of the epidemic, and whether it has assessed the effectiveness of such measures. 2. As it has been reported that some merchants have made use of epidemic-related news to inflate prices of essential livelihood commodities in a bid to reap profit from disasters, of the measures that the government has put in place to deter the relevant situation. Whether it will ask the relevant policy bureaus and institutions, such as the Consumer Council, to step up the monitoring of commodity prices and disseminate correct information on the supply and prices of essential livelihood commodities through the Information Services Department. And 3, whether it will consider, by following the practices of other regions, setting up regulatory authorities such as the State Administration for Market Regulation set up on the mainland, and enacting legislation, for instance, the anti-price gouging statutes implemented in certain states of the United States, to implement price control during times of emergency to ensure price stability of essential livelihood commodities, and specifying more essential goods such as food and anti-epidemic supplies as reserved commodities under the Reserved Commodities Ordinance. If so, of the implementation details. If not, the reasons for that. Secretary for Commerce and Economic Development. President, I'd like to thank the Honorable Stanley Ng's question. The coronavirus disease 2019 epidemic has continued for over 2 years. With the support of the central government and efforts by the HKSAR government, the SAR has been ensuring efficient and stable supply of food and various supplies. Having consulted the Food and Health Bureau, the Transport Housing Bureau, Financial Services and Treasury Bureau, and the Consumer Council, our consolidated replies as follows. First, at the outset of the epidemic in early 2020, there was an acute shortage of anti-epidemic supplies, in particular facial masks, around the world. Our target at that time was to increase supply by every means. In this regard, the Government Logistics Department procured masks and other anti-epidemic items worldwide through different channels and means so as to meet the public needs. In the face of a shortage of supply around the world and in the local market at that time, the government has established the Local Mask Production Subsidy Scheme in March 2020. It's a policy breakthrough. It's to provide subsidy to facilitate the establishment of local mask production facilities and the building up of stock. The 20 subsidized production lines collectively delivered a total of 469 million masks to the government. We also provided technical support through the Hong Kong Productivity Council to another 35 production lines to increase local production. And we're pleased to note that the gradual increase in supply since then. And nowadays, the supply, price, and quality of masks have greatly improved. Well, this is an example of the special measures that we have taken in the special times. Since the outbreak of the epidemic, government departments have monitored specifically and closely the food supply situation in the market and liaised with the trade to ensure a stable supply. Mainland is the major source of fresh food supply for Hong Kong, with processed food and fresh food from the farms in Guangdong Province accounting for majority of the supply. So we have been communicating with the Guangdong Province government to maintain an adequate and stable supply of food to Hong Kong. After the outbreak of the fifth wave of the epidemic early this year, the task force of supplies from the mainland, led by the Transport and Housing Bureau, has been working closely with the mainland government to explore various means to restore stability of goods supply from the mainland to Hong Kong. And these include the launch of water and rail transport within a short period of time in response to the tight capacity of road transport owing to goods vehicle drivers being affected at that time, with a view to complementing the supply through road, water, and railways transport. Regarding fresh food, the two governments opened opened new channels for imports via water transport and extended opening hours of the Mankamto control point to further facilitate fresh food trucks to cross the boundary so that the supply of fresh food from the mainland could be quickly restored and the prices could return to the normal level. The fifth wave of the epidemic has seen such a surging demand for medical supplies, and central government has provided support, cater for the needs of various government departments and units participating in the anti-epidemic work. The task force of ensuring medical supplies, led by the Commerce and Economic Development Bureau, has worked closely with its mainland counterparts to ensure that large quantities of medical supplies procured with the coordination of the central government are delivered to Hong Kong in an orderly manner. There are more than 30 types of supplies, including rapid antigen test kits, anti-epidemic proprietary Chinese medicines, paracetamol, high-grade protective masks, and personal protective equipment. We also have, through multiple channels, distribute these medical supplies to various target groups, including, for instance, confirmed patients, frontline personnel, people with high infection risk, underprivileged groups, as well as members of the public. And among them, anti-epidemic kits were distributed to confirmed patients and their family members living in the same household. 3 million anti-epidemic service bags containing medical supplies were also distributed to the households across Hong Kong in early April. Furthermore, with the support of the central government, production capacity for relevant medical supplies from the mainland, such as anti-epidemic proprietary Chinese medicines and rat kits, and their supply to Hong Kong have sufficiently increased, resulting in adequate supply, and retail prices have also remained stable. Provision of timely and accurate information help ease public concern. Since 15th of February, the government, including THB and CEDB, has regularly announced the latest situation of the supply of fresh food, goods, and medical supplies from mainland to Hong Kong. Also, the Council is monitoring closely the supply of price various daily necessities and anti-epidemic supplies, as well as sales practices of the traders. In view of the fifth wave of the epidemic, apart from urging traders to ensure a stable supply of goods, or display clearly and accurately the prices and refrain from raising prices, we also call upon consumers to remain level-headed and rational while shopping. The Council has worked with CEDB to launch approved rat kit search tool to facilitate members of the public to ascertain whether the kits available in the market are provided are up to standard. Hong Kong is a highly open free port unless otherwise prescribed by law with sufficient policy justifications. All commodities can freely imported and exported, responding effectively and promptly to market demands. As a staple food in Hong Kong, rice is designated as a reserved commodity under the subsidiary legislation of the Reserved Commodities Ordinance. We've been ensuring stable supply of rice and keeping sufficient stock in case of emergencies or any temporary shortage of supply. All bureaus and relevant departments will continue to monitor closely supply and demand of various essential supplies and to devise appropriate measures to stabilize supply in the market. Well, based on the past experience, including that of the fifth wave of epidemic, adequate supply of staple prices of goods can be effectively secured by ensuring sufficient and stable supply in the market, reducing barriers and obstacles in the supply chain, effective dissemination of information, close collaboration with mainland government, and close communication with the trade. Therefore, the government currently has no plan to implement price control during times of emergency situation, or include certain types of supplies on the list of reserved commodities. Thank you, President. Mr. Stanley Ng, President, I think the reply from the Secretary is very disappointing, and the message is very negative because it would give the merchants a chance, the unscrupulous merchants a chance to raise prices of food supplies. And it seems that the government has no means to curb this kind of price gouging. So I hope that the administration can reply in a more clear terms why it has not been possible to control prices in emergency situation. I think we have to adopt a new mindset because what you have been saying are regular practices under regular situation. But then if there is a shortage in the supply chain, you must have a kind of measures to fight or to prevent unscrupulous merchants from price gouging. Could you perhaps state, for instance, can medical supplies be listed as a reserved commodity? President, I do not agree to what Mr. Ng has said. As I've stated in my reply, in tackling the problem of food shortage, if there is a shortage of supply, we have to find new sources of supply. For instance, at the beginning of 2020, when facial masks was in great shortage, so we tried our best and actually adopted various means to increase or to the supply of face masks. So in June of the same year, we had been able to distribute masks to the members of the public. However, if the cause is because of the problem in cross-border transportation, then we have to tackle the problem and then go to talk with our mainland counterpart to discuss with them to ensure that the supply of fresh food must be kept stable. Not just the supplier, we also have to talk to the transportation operators because, as I mentioned just now, there were some vehicle drivers who were affected, and that's why it had affected the supply of fresh food crossing the border. So we have made special means, for instance, to make special arrangements for the food supply to cross the border efficiently. For instance, asking Hong Kong drivers to take shift and then take over after the goods have crossed the border. And then for pricing, if this market has adequate and correct information, then as I've mentioned, the Consumer Council has produced a kind of platform so that people can check the prices of various food items in the various supermarkets. We also, through our different departments, give out accurate and updated information about the supply of fresh food and food items on the market. If there are unscrupulous merchants who try to do price gouging, what we have to do is to ensure that there is a stable supply of these items. And then the market would regulate itself and price gouging would not be possible. Well, compared to the beginning of 2020, when there were a shortage of face masks, at that time it cost a great deal to buy a face mask. But then now we see a stable situation, and also the RAT kits. We can also see that we have a very stable supply, and so nowadays, if we go to the market and buy a test kit, it would cost only 1/10 of its highest price at the critical stage. Well, thank you. Mr. Yim Kong. President. It is very important to keep stable supply of daily necessities in the market. I'd like to ask the government if you have special measures to ensure that logistic costs would affect the cost of these livelihood products. So I think especially the logistics, cross-border logistics would be of utmost importance. Well, under the fifth wave, we've seen a kind of stoppage or halt of a cross-border traffic. Well, now most of the goods vehicles drivers have recovered and the situation has been rectified. I'd like to ask the administration how it could ensure the kind of smooth cross-border transport in order to lower the transportation costs on these food items. Well, I do agree to Mr. Yim's point because in the supply chain, one of the most important sector is logistics, especially for the delivery of fresh food and also medical supplies. Most of them come from the mainland across the border. And that is why during the fifth wave, we have set up different task force with our mainland counterparts. One of them is to a special task force to ensure stable arrangements in the cross-border delivery of these important food items. We have a multi-pronged approach. On the one hand, If goods vehicle drivers, some of them are infected, we try our best to have full supply of new drivers and make sure that there are some standby or even reserve drivers or standby drivers so that there will not be a lackage of drivers. And second, we make arrangements. That is, we have Hong Kong drivers waiting at the border so as to take over when the mainland drivers stop right at the border point. We also have developed water transport. Well, some people at first might criticize that water transport would not be viable. However, it is proven that water transport had been very helpful when there were obstacles in road or railway transport. And also, as mentioned, railway transport, we have also made use of additional railway transport arrangements so as to ensure a stable supply of food across the border. Well, we also have another task force with our counterparts on the medical services sector. The central government helped us to procure different medical items and also anti-pandemic equipments to procure these items so as to supply to Hong Kong. Well, it has been very successful. It has ensured a stable supply of these essential goods, and also the price level has been kept at a very stable level. We have also been discussing with the task force to ensure that these items can also be available in the market, not just to the relevant parties or the frontline medical staff. Well, for instance, the Chinese medicine propriety anti-epidemic propriety Chinese medicines. Well, we have stable supply of these CM or propriety Chinese medicines, and the price has been kept at a stable level. Mr. Leung Mun Kong. Thank you, President. Prevent price gouging and to assist members of the public to locate a reasonably priced item. I think information is very important. It is very good to see that the government has developed a platform so that people can search for important and updated information on this platform. However, that is only for rat kids search. But then there are other items, for instance, the paracetamol or different kind of medicines or food supplies. Would the will your department consider developing similar tools so that members of the public can, in the long run, search the availability of these items in different districts and to ensure that the prices are kept at a reasonable level? President, I agree that this is a good suggestion, but then of course it is impossible for us to develop platforms to include all items, over thousands of items that people might need in their daily lives. Well, however, I've mentioned that the Consumer Council has been doing this continuously. If you visit their webpage, you will see that the Consumer Council has gathered the information of several major supermarkets. All the items in these major supermarkets, there is a kind of pricing comparison between the various items in these major supermarkets. There are about 2,300 items altogether. And also, the Consumer Council would also conduct a special survey regarding some particular items that the market may need at a certain period of time. For medical supplies, I believe that this should not be done only by the council. Well, as Dr. Choi has also his department has also give out accurate information to the public. For instance, teaching the members of the public how to use this medicine, such as paracetamol, or the proper use of medicine. So these are the kind of public education. And during the fifth wave, we have made use of the channel 32 of RTHK and designated a special anti-epidemic channel. And on the channel, there are different programs inviting medical experts and other specialists to tell the members of the public accurate information to fight the epidemic. I know that also at the 4:30 press briefing, daily press briefing at 4:30 p.m., we also have colleagues from the HA and CHP explaining the situation to members of the public and giving out most updated information. So this is what we can do with the cooperation of different departments and units. Mr. Kwok Wai Keung. Thank you, President. It has been more than 2 years that we have the epidemic. Well, there are the prices of different items have risen, not just food items, but also daily necessities. Well, the underprivileged group have suffered a lot. The minimum wage has not been adjusted, and it's over 4 years that it is kept at the same level. In the past 4 years, inflation has already reached 7%. So workers receiving only the minimum wage will actually see a reduction of their wages by 7%. Well, Secretary, you talked about supply a lot, but then it seems that you have neglected about price gouging. And well, actually, in the market, people would try to maximize their benefit by raising prices of scarce goods. So if the administration does not have special measure to protect members of the public, how can we enjoy a reasonable and stable supply of food items at a reasonable price? Other places in other countries would do price control. They have price control measure. I'd like to ask the Secretary whether Hong Kong would do that. Mr. Kwok's question actually have been answered just now. We're not just focusing on supply. As I said just now, we have different means and measures to rectify the situation. As I said before, in the past 2 to 3 years, we have special measures at very special times. Well, we actually have measures more effective than a price control measure, such as the assisted production or subsidized production of face masks. It has proved to be very successful and effective. And we also have a subsidized scheme. We subsidize 20 production lines to produce face masks in Hong Kong. We also provide technical support to another 35 production lines to increase total production of face masks in Hong Kong. So from what you can see now, the supply of face masks is very stable. We have very high quality face masks in the market at a very reasonable price. So for the reserve items, reserve commodities ordinance, we do have the ordinance, and it is there to help at different situation. But then this is not a one-size-fits-all measure. We have to look at the situation. Well, as I've stated just now, I believe that all the measures taken have been very effective.
That at least 3 fires involving yachts broke out in typhoon shelters in the latter half of last year, which were suspected to be related to homestay lodging yachts that operated staycations at sea. Moreover, in recent years, yachts operating homestay lodging have occupied much of the space in typhoon shelters. As such yachts have mixed berthing with other types of vessels, they have seriously affected other vessels, resulting in frictions and conflicts. On the other hand, some yachts have illegally connected to shore power supplies, which may easily cause fire on a chain of neighboring vessels. Regarding the management of typhoon shelters, will the government inform this council, 1, whether it has taken law enforcement and regulatory actions in respect of those homestay lodging yachts operating in typhoon shelters, and whether it has assessed the effectiveness of such actions; 2, as currently there is a shortage of space in a serious mixed berthing situation in typhoon shelters, whether the government will adopt the industry's suggestion of implementing an arrangement for demarcated berthing areas for vessels in typhoon shelters; and 3, as some fishermen have pointed out that under the outdated planning and regulatory legislation, typhoon shelters have seen insufficient space, incessant conflicts, and inadequate capability of typhoon resistance, whether the government will expeditiously commence a consultancy study on the expansion of the existing typhoon shelters or the construction of new ones. Thank you. Secretary for Transport and Housing. Thank you, President. The government attaches great importance to the management of typhoon shelters and has been maintaining communication with the stakeholders, pragmatically handling different issues of the typhoon shelters, and proactively improving the management and facilities of the typhoon shelters. There are currently 14 typhoon shelters in Hong Kong, providing a total of 419 hectares of mooring space for use by local and small visiting vessels. The government will ensure that there is sufficient space within Hong Kong waters as typhoon shelters suitable for small vessels to take refuge during inclement weather, so as to safeguard the safety of vessels and the crew members on board. The Marine Department has been regulating the operation of typhoon shelters in accordance with the current legislation. MD has designated passage areas and anchorage areas in the typhoon shelters to ensure safe navigation and orderly berthing of vessels. During its daily patrol, MD also strives to keep the passage areas clear, as well as conducting inspections on any safety issues related to vessels, such as the risk of bilging, listing, sinking, and fire. Apart from assisting or instructing the vessels concerned to rectify the situation, MD will carry out investigations and appropriate follow-up actions where necessary. Regarding improvement to the facilities of the typhoon shelters, in response to the demand of fishermen, we completed the construction of additional landing facilities in the Tuen Mun Typhoon Shelter in November last year. Besides, regarding the industry's request for constructing a landing facility in the Aberdeen Typhoon Shelter for use by small vessels, MD has carried out consultation with relevant stakeholders recently on the preliminary design proposal. In addition, wave walls of about 1 meter high were constructed by the Civil Engineering and Development Department on the breakwater at the Aberdeen West Typhoon Shelter and the outer breakwater at the Aberdeen South Typhoon Shelter in March and June last year respectively, with a view to enhancing the capability of breakwaters at typhoon shelters against wave attack. The construction works at the inner breakwater at the Aberdeen South Typhoon Shelter is also expected to be completed in the third quarter of this year. My reply to Mr. Stephen Ho's questions is as follows. 1. Under the Merchant Shipping Local Vessels Certification and Licensing Regulation, a pleasure vessel, that is Class 4 vessel, shall only be used by its owner or if it has been let to any person by that person exclusively for pleasure purposes. If a pleasure vessel is used for residential purposes in the waters of Hong Kong, the owner of the vessel, his agent and coxswain, each commits an offence and is liable to, on conviction, to a maximum fine of $10,000. MD's officers conduct inspections of vessels in Hong Kong waters from time to time and carry out investigations upon public complaints. If illegal activities are found, such cases will be handled in accordance with the law. In recent years, MD has noticed that some pleasure vessels are being used for operating homestay lodgings via internet. In view of this, MD has taken law enforcement operations specifically to combat pleasure vessels being used for non-pleasure purposes. MD conducted undercover operations in the Shau Kei Wan Typhoon Shelter and the Aberdeen Typhoon Shelter respectively in December last year, during which 2 pleasure vessels were found to be used as guest houses. MD is conducting prosecution. In the past 5 years, out of the 27 successful prosecutions by MD against pleasure vessels being used for non-pleasure purposes, 8 cases involved pleasure vessels being used as guest houses. MD will keep enhancing patrol in typhoon shelters and take enforcement actions to combat the contraventions. Under the Merchant Shipping Local Vessels Typhoon Shelters Regulation, generally, all local vessels are allowed to enter into typhoon shelters for refuge. The regulation does not empower MD to designate a specific area in a typhoon shelter exclusively for the mooring of certain class of vessel. Nevertheless, in response to the request of the industry, MD launched a pilot scheme for the exclusive mooring of non-pleasure vessels within the Kwun Tong Typhoon Shelter through administrative means in 2018. The pilot scheme was implemented with the collaboration of stakeholders of the Kwun Tong Typhoon Shelter. Under the pilot scheme, non-pleasure vessels berth at the southern part of the typhoon shelter, whereas the northern part is for the berthing of all classes of vessels. Last year, the Transport Housing Transport and Housing Bureau, together with MD, actually explored with relevant stakeholders to introduce designated berthing areas for vessels in the Aberdeen Typhoon Shelter through administrative means, taking into account the demand of the industry. Discussion on different proposals was held on a number of occasions. MD is willing to extend the successful experience of the pilot scheme to other typhoon shelters. This will serve as the basis for MD's continued discussions with the stakeholders of the Aberdeen Typhoon Shelter, with a view to reducing the frictions and conflicts caused by berthing of vessels of different classes in typhoon shelters. MD has also been carrying out assessments of the overall territory-wide and supply and demand of sheltered spaces regularly. Based on the assessment of typhoon shelter space requirements released in 2017, the overall territory-wide supply of shelter spaces from then on until 2030 was estimated to be adequate to meet the demand from local vessels. A new round of the assessment has already commenced to assess the overall territory-wide supply of shelter spaces from now on till 2035 and is expected to be completed in the second half of this year. During the assessment, we will review different suggestions made by the industry. Thank you, President. Mr. Stephen Ho. Thank you, President. In paragraph 4, the administration mentioned the additional landing facility at the Twin Moon Typhoon Shelter, but that has not really addressed the issues of faced by the industry, so you can't cite that as an example. We should have something like landing steps, the facilities like at the yacht club, so people could just land there, but then you just gave us a landing step and people will still have to steer the boat to the middle of the waters for mooring. And so you have not really addressed the problem, although that's how you try to put it, and I find that unacceptable. So my question is really about paragraph 2 in your main reply. That is the pilot scheme in Kwun Tong, rather is a part 2 of your reply, the pilot scheme in Kwun Tong Typhoon Shelter that is not really a successful example. Now we have the fish market there and seafood store, so in Aberdeen, so we can't the fishing vessels can't really leave Aberdeen. Now you're saying that for classes 2 to 4 vessels, they could go there, and then for pleasure vessels, they have to go to the other side. But then as soon as you mention the pilot scheme, people already trying to take up the spaces so they could charge people for it. So you can't just designate a small area for mooring for classes 2 to 4 vessels. If you consider the economic needs and the needs of the industry, you should have designated parking spaces so people could disembark in a safe manner. It's not only those who are from the yacht clubs could do so. Secretary, well, I could see that Mr. Stephen Ho is rather emotional. I know he really cares much about fishermen. Now, for the 2 cases mentioned by Mr. Stephen Ho, I actually went to the site together with Mr. Stephen Ho. I went on board a vessel and I talked to the fishermen. Now, as to whether you consider the pilot scheme successful or not is not important. What is important is whether the facilities are popular among users. Now, for stakeholders of the Kwun Tong Typhoon Shelter, we discussed with them. We sought their agreement before we proceeded with the construction. We have explored all the feasible options with the stakeholders, and it's only after they said yes that we proceeded with the works. Of course, we could always do better, because with everything, the first time we do something, there's always room for us to enhance the arrangement the second time. So for the landing facilities or the destination of mooring areas in the typhoon shelter and so on, as I mentioned in the main reply, in future, for other typhoon shelters, if there are such views and there is consensus and people could exist with each other in harmony and people have mutual understanding, then of course that would be the best result. So that's why, as I mentioned in the main reply, we are prepared to listen to the views of different stakeholders in future so that we could enhance the relevant proposal, and then we could have regard to the actual situation of the typhoon shelter and make arrangements accordingly. Mr. Frankie Yik. In the main reply, President, there's mention that in the past 5 years, you took out 27 successful prosecutions against pleasure vessels being used for non-pleasure purposes, and 8 cases involved the pleasure vessels being used as guest houses. What about the other cases? What were the offences? In Taofen Shelter there are many dweller boats. Boats were just moored there. Now, Mr. Stephen Ho asked you, but you did not really answer the question. That is illegal connection of onshore power supply. Now, what have you done in the past to take enforcement action against these cases and stop the illegal connection? Now, for onshore power supply, for Taofen shelters, they're managed by the MD, and there is supply of power and water by the Electrical and Mechanical Services Department and the Water Supplies Department. In the past, together with the police, the Fire Services Department, Food and Environmental Hygiene Department, the Electrical and Mechanical Services Department and Water Services Department, they conducted joint inspections. And then they took enforcement action as appropriate. For example, for the supply of onshore power, when we conducted inspections with the MSD, we found there were irregularities, and then we did issue notices of improvement to the relevant parties. And also for water supply, if the requirements are not complied with, we will follow up on those cases. So that's the situation. In the past 5 years, for incidents at the Taofen shelter, that's mostly to do with collision between vessels or minor collision or fires. Incidents are mainly in Aberdeen. Actually, there has been no fire incident. And then there are 51 general cases and 5. And then for 2017, 69 cases, 2018, 72 cases of prosecution, and then 20 and 21, 40 and 75 cases, and 2022 so far 5 cases of incidents, and there have been 31 prosecution cases. And also among the prosecution taken out, now that's about expiry of relevant vessel registration, or perhaps there are some irregularities with the operation of vessels and so on. And anyway, we will supply the information in detail to the Secretariat. Which part of your question has not been answered? He did not really reply to my question specifically. Now, he said in his main reply that in the past 5 years, there were 27 successful prosecutions, 8 cases involved pleasure vessels being used as guest houses. I asked what about the other cases, but then I don't know what his reply was about. Because 27 successful prosecutions about pleasure vessels being used for non-pleasure purposes. So what has that to do with this vessel collision and so on? Well, I have nothing else to add, but I don't have the details at hand, so I will supply the information to the Secretariat. Mr. Yu, Mr. Stanley, thank you. Now, in my constituency, southeast territories including Sai Kung, fishermen did tell me about these problems too. And it's obvious that you're not taking enough actions. So what more can you do to prevent occurrence of such incidents? And then for the fishermen and those who vessel owners who need the berthing spaces most, what can you do to help them? How can you make sure people are using the berthing spaces properly? Now, you mentioned some figures, how many berthing spaces there are in Hong Kong, but it's the same with parking spaces for bicycles. Some bicycles are just left there, and people use the parking spaces for other purposes. For example, they put miscellaneous items there, carton boxes there, and so on. It's the same with vessel berthing spaces. Now, you did not mention Sai Kung. In Sai Kung, we don't have enough berthing spaces at the Taofen shelter there too. Mr. Stephen Ho took me there, and we heard what fishermen said, shouldn't we have more berthing spaces for cyclone fishermen? Now the situation is not really promising. So I hope you will talk to different sectors in different districts and find out what their needs are, and then you could manage all the typhoon shelters more properly. Thank you. Secretary for Transport and Housing. Thank you for your views. Definitely we'll do that, as I mentioned just now. Every 5 years, we do the assessment of typhoon shelters phase requirements. And we have already started the exercise. So in the second half of the year, we would see the findings. And then in the process, we will continue to communicate with stakeholders. Thank you. Mr. Yu Pak Leung. Thank you, President. Secretary, according to media reports, in the past decade, I think there's surge of in the number of pleasure vessels by some 60%. And then, of course, during the epidemic, staycation at sea became popular, but then such homestay lodging users pose danger to other users in typhoon shelter. Now, for staycation at sea, I have some questions for you. Firstly, now people have been complaining about the enforcement taken by the Marine Department is not enough. If you just go to Kwun Tong Typhoon Shelter, you see the situation is very different now than it was 10 years ago. And then we see a low level of prosecution figures. But in the past year, during the epidemic, how many inspections did the Marine Department carry out? How many undercover operations did it carry out? That's the first question. Mr. Yu, each member could only ask one question, please, so please take your seat. Secretary. Thank you, President. On inspections, say if we talk about staycation on the 2nd and the 8th of October 2021 at the Chao Kei Wan and Aberdeen Typhoon Shelter, undercover operations were conducted. And as I mentioned, in those two operations, there were two cases identified, and we are now proceeding with prosecution. Mr. Paul Chair. I wonder if Hong Kong waters cover the berthing spaces of clubs. Well, if that's the case, then, by common sense, we know that where land premiums are high, many vessel owners may choose to live on board their vessels. But then in 5 years, there were only just 27 prosecutions. The maximum fine is $10,000. It's so much cheaper than paying rent. So either because you're ignoring this issue altogether, we're not taking out enforcement actions proactively, and you're too liberal with enforcement. It's the same with illegal parking. Cars are just parked illegally everywhere. With berthing spaces at a typhoon shelter, we have a similar problem. So do you have the determination to do something? If not, instead, you could just put in place a licensing system so people could live on board their vessels. Now, you say that you don't allow that, but you are not taking enforcement action. So would you review your policy? Would you say allow people to take a license to live on board their vessel? If not, then shouldn't you take out more enforcement actions? Secretary. Well, in reply, the answer is specific in response to Mr. Porcher's question. If a pleasure vessel is used for non-pleasure purpose, it's against the law. So using a pleasure vessel as lodging, that's against the law. But if you look at past history, we have seen dweller boats before, but then because the housing condition in Hong Kong has improved as a whole, so this is no longer the case. That's why when we give out license to pleasure vessels, it's really for pleasure purposes. So it's about the spirit of the law and our enforcement action. They are inconsistent. Thank you.
Question 5, the Honourable Chen Xiuhong. Thank you, President. The Hong Kong SAR has a constitutional obligation to enact legislation on Article 23 of the Basic Law. Article 7 of the Hong Kong National Security Law also clearly stipulates that the Hong Kong SAR shall complete as early as possible legislation for safeguarding national security as stipulated in the Basic Law of the Hong Kong SAR and shall refine relevant laws. In this connection, will the government inform this Council, 1, of the latest progress regarding the enactment of legislation on Article 23 and the ways in which the government plans to conduct public consultation, and 2, how it will take forward the publicity and explanatory work regarding the enactment of legislation on Article 23, with a view to enabling members of the public to understand that as an inalienable part of the PRC, the Hong Kong SAR is constitutionally bound, apart from morally obliged, to safeguard national security. Thank you. Secretary for Security. President, my consolidated reply, the Honourable Chan's question is as follows. Enacting local legislation on Article 23 of the Basic Law and refining laws relevant to safeguarding national security are the constitutional responsibilities of the Hong Kong SAR. Article 3 of the Basic Law clearly stipulates that the Hong Kong SAR shall enact laws on its own to prohibit 7 types of acts that endanger national security. Article 3 of the decision of the National People's Congress on establishing and improving the legal system and enforcing mechanism for the Hong Kong SAR to safeguard national security, adopted on the 28th of May 2020, and Article 7 of the law of the PRC on safeguarding national security in the Hong Kong SAR both require the SAR to complete as early as possible legislation for safeguarding national security as stipulated in the Basic Law. In fact, every state will enact laws to safeguard national security. This is an inherent right of every sovereign state as well as an international practice. The authorization by the central authorities for the Hong Kong SAR to enact law on its own for safeguarding national security demonstrates the principle of one country, two systems and the state's confidence in the Hong Kong SAR. As far as safeguarding national security is concerned, there are also practical needs to legislate on Article 23. The Hong Kong SAR has yet to do this, and nor has it made good use of existing legislation and their deficiencies, the law and enforcement mechanism for safeguarding national security, resulting in underlying risks to national security. In recent years, as the country develops, many Western countries regard China as a major competitor and even adopt a completely hostile position against it. Given Hong Kong's unique environment and way of life, under the principle of one country, two systems, it's easy for external elements to infiltrate with malicious intention if attempt to foment color revolution, subvert the state power, as well as to promote and advocate Hong Kong independence, and thus national security risks intensified. Since the failure of the Hong Kong SAR to complete the enactment of the legislation on Article 24 of the Basic Law in 2003, there have been drastic changes in the national security risk of the Hong Kong SAR. Over the past 2 decades or so, Hong Kong experienced various accounts of social chaos, including the illegal Occupy Central movement in 2014, the Mong Kok riot in 2016, and the large-scale riots in 2019. We have also seen acts of activities that seriously undermine the rule of law and public order and endanger national security. They include the rise of activities of Hong Kong independence and self-determination. Some use the media, arts and culture as soft resistance means to disseminate messages of opposing the central authorities and the Hong Kong SAR government and to incite hatred against the central authorities and the body of power of the Hong Kong SAR. 2 territory-wide large-scale riots with extensive damage of public facilities. Also, some members of external organizations openly raised funds for donated equipment to the rioters during the riots. 3. Speeches, texts, or publications which contain slandering accusations with a view to inciting the public, glorifying violence, and weakening the concepts of the law and law-abiding awareness of the public. 4. Local terrorism, which is growing and increasingly materialized into actions. It includes lone wolf attacks and organizing, planning, and committing local terrorism activities in small groups. And 5. Long-term infiltration on all fronts by external elements through grooming local organizations and individuals as agents in Hong Kong and taking part in activities endangering national security through these agents, including attempting to influence election results with a view to subverting the state power. Since the implementation of the national security law, social order has been restored, but the national security risk I mentioned should not be overlooked. Moreover, activities of the criminals have gone increasing underground and become increasingly clandestine, while some lawbreakers have absconded overseas and wantonly colluded with external elements and continued to engage in acts and activities endangering national security. Among the 7 types of the acts which Hong Kong itself shall enact laws to prohibit as prescribed in Article 3, 2 are directly covered by the national security law. Existing local legislation such as the Crimes Ordinance, Official Secrets Ordinance, and Societies Ordinance only cover part of the relevant acts, with areas requiring enhancement. The Hong Kong South government has been carrying out relevant work in respect of the enactment of legislation on Article 23. Apart from examining relevant national laws as well as laws of similar nature in other jurisdictions, we're also reviewing the implementation experience of the national security law, the relevant court verdicts and deficiencies in the existing laws, as well as taking into account past happenings with a view to drawing up effective and proactive proposals and provisions to cope with the risks concerned. As for publicity and explanatory work, we adhere to the principle of openness and transparency and will proactively explain to the public and stakeholders the constitutional responsibility of the Hong Kong South to enact legislation on Article 23, as well as the contents of various legislative proposals and considerations involved. We'll also listen to the views of the public and stakeholders with an open mind. In addition to traditional public consultation channels, we also make good use of various platforms, including online ones, to disseminate the relevant information and provide explanation to various stakeholders. Nevertheless, we do not rule out that there may still be people smearing the legislative work with malicious or fake information when opportunities arise. We will make clarifications against such slanders proactively and promptly, and if necessary, engage professionals to assist us and the publicity and explanatory work. The Security Bureau has been working in collaboration with the Department of Justice and relevant law enforcement agencies in taking forward the legislative work on Article 23. However, in view of the new wave of the epidemic, the Hong Kong South government, including the Security Bureau and the Department of Justice, have accorded top priority to the early stabilization of the epidemic, and this has affected our work. Besides, the work of formulating the legislative proposals is by no means easy. It's complicated, covering various acts and activities which endanger national security. In addition, the international situation has witnessed drastic changes, while some existing laws relevant to safeguarding national security, such as the Official Secrets Ordinance and the Societies Ordinance, were enacted a long time ago and require substantial amendments in order to cope with the prevailing national security risks. Apart from effectively addressing past and present national security risks and threats, the proposals should also be sufficiently forward-looking to address possible risks in future. Besides, the legislative proposals must be practicable in terms of implementation and be effective in safeguarding national security. President, we will press ahead and face up to the challenges and get the job done regardless. Thank you. Mr. Chen Xiu-Hong. President, I'm pleased to hear from the Secretary that they will conduct proper consultation and also explanation of the legislation on Article 23. I hope they will take into account all views received in public consultation and address the concerns of different sectors. But as said by the Secretary, there have been drastic changes in the international situation, and external forces are interfering into business of Hong Kong, using Hong Kong as a proxy to suppress PRC. We can imagine that with the start of public consultation, external forces will smear and attack us. This constitutional obligation to legislate on Article 23 will be demonized. I'd like to ask the Secretary what challenges they expect and what strategies will be adopted to tackle them. Thank you. Secretary. Well, we anticipate that during the legislative process, they're bound to be accusations and smearing, including accusations of smearing from external forces, external media, and also proxies of them in Hong Kong. We will do the explanatory work properly. We will make it clear to the public the reason for legislation. This is not just about our constitutional obligation required under the Basic Law and the National Security Law, and as well as the actual needs. Starting from 2019, we have seen many acts that undermine national security, although the national security law has been most useful in suppressing these. However, among the 4 types of offenses. There are 2 covered in the national security law, but there are still 5 types of acts not covered. So we have to explain to the public the reason and justifications, and we need to tell them the facts that we do need the legislation. Mr. Tan Ka-piu, as said by the Secretary, the failure to complete the enactment of legislation on Article 23 poses a security risk to the country, and it's obvious that the international situation is increasingly complicated and geopolitical risks have intensified. So we must legislate on Article 23. We must conduct an overview of our present laws. Now, pending that, how are we going to deal with the situation? Is the Hong Kong SL government confident that we can take effective means and measures even before the legislation on Article 23 is completed? We can effectively ensure national security and the security of Hong Kong. Secretary, before the enactment of the legislation on Article 23, we have got the national security law. There are laws on secession, subversion, and terrorist activities, and also colluding with foreign forces. Now, in our crimes ordinance, we have got laws on treason and also the intention to incite. And in our society's ordinance, we've also regulation of political bodies. However, they are far from perfect, and that's why we need to legislate on Article 23. But that doesn't mean that we do not have any means to tackle the current situation. We do have them, but we have to enhance them, and we have to enhance our current legislation in view of possible future risks. Mr. Chang Hak-ken, to safeguard national security, enactment of legislation on Article 23 is one means, but then education on safeguarding national security is also indispensable. I'd like to know what concrete plans the government have in this regard. Secretary, under Article 9 and 10 of the National Security Law, it is stated clearly that we should take necessary means to publicize, to educate the public, to enhance the national security awareness and law-abiding awareness of Hong Kong residents. The law was promulgated on the 30th of June 2020, and we have done publicity on various fronts. We have produced publicity leaflets, we have produced press releases, and also articles and media interviews, and both physical seminars and webinars. And there is also the virtual exhibition on the anniversaries of its promulgation. And then on the 15th of April, we've also got the Education Day on National Security to enhance our younger generation's awareness. And in 2022, we've also got a national security participation scheme. We have got poster design competition and online quizzes to encourage primary and secondary school students to take part, so that the idea can take root in our school campuses. In the second anniversary of the promulgation of the law, we have enhanced our virtual exhibition to make it more interesting so that more people understand national security.
Last question, seeking oral reply, the Honourable Holden Chow. The Chief Executive proposed in the 2021 policy address to reserve a total of about 250 hectares of land for the development of innovation and technology and advanced industries. Besides, the government has invited the Hong Kong Science and Technology Parks Corporation to plan conceptually for the construction of a second advanced manufacturing center. Will the government inform this council that given the government plans to construct a railway running through Hong Shui Kiu to link up the Qianhai Shenzhen Hong Kong Modern Service Industry Corporation Song, and the Hong Shui Kiu has a geographical advantage of being relatively close to Nanshan District, whether the government will consider setting up the second AMC, Advanced Manufacturing Center, in Hongshui-Q or Tuen Mun so as to create employment opportunities locally for residents in New Territories Northwest. If so, of the details, if not, the reasons for that. 2, as some professionals in the industries have pointed out that Hong Kong is well positioned to produce new generation semiconductors and that semiconductors are in high demand on the mainland and in other parts of the world. Whether the government will introduce measures such as providing special land and offering preferential treatment to attract enterprises and talents to Hong Kong to engage in the production of semiconductors so as to support the development of such an advanced industry. If so, of the details. And 3, given that the Chief Executive has earlier announced the proposal on the reorganization of government structure, under which the Innovation and Technology Bureau is proposed to be expanded into an Innovation, Technology and Industry Bureau by the next term government, whether the government will at the same time set a target on the percentage of the contribution of the manufacturing industry to the GDP so as to facilitate performance measurement. Secretary for Innovation and Technology. President, I'd like to thank Mr. Chow's question. With the strong research and development capabilities and advantage as an international and market-oriented economy, the government has been actively promoting reindustrialization to develop the advanced manufacturing industry, which is less land or labor intensive, and it is conducive to creating quality employment opportunities and foster diversification of economic development. In the 2021 policy address, the government suggested that the Innovation and Technology Bureau will be expanded into Innovation, Technology and Industry Bureau. Well, having consulted the Development Bureau and the Policy Innovation Coordination Office, our reply is as follows. 1, the Northern Metropolis Development Strategy proposes the construction of the Hong Kong-Shenzhen Western Rail Link to connect the Hongshui-Q-Ha-Chin New Development Area and the Shanghai-Shenzhen-Hong Kong Modern Service Industry Cooperation Zone, which promotes and deepens cooperation between Hong Kong and Shenzhen on the development of high-end economy, as well as expanding the NDA. The expanded NDA would be enhanced and transformed into a modern service center, becoming one of the economic and employment blocks in northern metropolis. The development strategy also proposes to build a sizable landmark facilities of IT industry at Lau Fau Shan and to facilitate R&D and application of software digital technology in order to promote innovative finance and provide services to IT industry and modern services industry. This can add impetus to Hong Kong's in-depth cooperation with the Shanghai Cooperation Zone and Nanshan District, and it could create more local employment opportunities and improve home job balance. The construction of cross-border rail link would also facilitate cross-border employment. The development strategy is a conceptual strategic plan with a view to proposing key action directions, conceptual action items, and policy initiatives. The government still needs to refine the recommendations of the development strategy and the related works, as well as conducting detailed planning and engineering studies to confirm the feasibility and the implementation. On the other hand, given the favorable responses of the industry to the Advanced Manufacturing Center at Tseung Kwan O Inno Park, the 2021 policy address announced to invite Hong Kong Science and Technology Parks Corporation to plan for the construction of a second AMC. We understand that the industry has a strong demand for land and for reindustrialization, and the granting of land often involves lengthy and complicated statutory procedures. So developing the second AMC at an Inno Park can speed up the construction of this important facility. The Hong Kong STEPC is carrying out initial preparatory works, including identifying a site from its 3 Inno parks and conducting an economic benefit analysis and a technical feasibility study for the second AMC so as to provide space and facilities for specialized industries to set up advanced manufacturing production lines. Number 2, since the inauguration of the current term government, the Innovation and Technology Bureau has been promoting reindustrialization and smart manufacturing in 5 areas: infrastructure, talent, capital, technology and science research, including support for semiconductor development and production. In terms of infrastructure, the construction works for the first AMC were completed in February this year, and those for the data technology hub were also completed in June 2020. Leasing activities for the two centers have commenced with a satisfactory market response. In addition to the idea of constructing a second AMC, the 2021 policy address also announced that the Hong Kong Shenzhen Innovation and Technology Park and the Lok Ma Chau Shantin area would be consolidated and developed into Shantin Technopole. And it will enable greater clustering effect for the technology sectors and provide more land for advanced manufacturing. As far as semiconductors are concerned, Hong Kong has advantages in the areas of chip design and packaging industries. There are about 60 related companies operating in the Hong Kong Science Park and the Inno Parks. The HKSTPC is developing the Microelectronics Center in the Yunlong Inno Park to provide industry with the necessary dedicated facilities and shared ancillary facilities for the development, testing, trial production, prototype production of microelectronic products such as semiconductor chips, including sensors, third-generation semiconductors, and heterogeneous integrated microelectronics. Construction of works for MEC is expected to be completed in late 2023 and will provide 36,000 square meters of gross floor area to support and promote development of microelectronics industry in Hong Kong and the application of R&D in high value-added industries. On technology, the Hong Kong Productivity Council has been assisting enterprises to move towards high value-added production and gradually upgrade to Industry 4.0, including organizing a wide range of training courses and seminars and assisting various sectors in setting up smart production lines in Hong Kong. In respect of talent training, the government launched the Reindustrialization and Technology Training Program in August 2018, which funds local enterprises on a matching basis for their staff to receive training in advanced technologies, especially those related to Industry 4.0, including digitized electronic industry and smart industrial systems. And there's a global STEM professorship scheme launched in June 2021, which supports local universities in recruiting world-renowned STEM scholars on those with great potential. Regarding capital, the government launched the Reindustrialization Funding Scheme in July 2020, which subsidizes manufacturers on a matching basis to set up new smart production lines in Hong Kong. And they come from different industries, including biotechnology, construction, medical devices, nanofiber materials, and electronics. And we welcome new companies, new enterprises interested in setting up smart production lines in Hong Kong to submit their applications. As for scientific research, the 5 R&D centers will also continue to carry out R&D work related to reindustrialization and also work closely in collaboration with relevant industries. The Advisory Committee on Innovation and Technology published a report in 2017 which set a target of reversing the declining trend of the manufacturing sector's contribution to the GDP by 2020. Well, in fact, the trend on the manufacturing sector's contribution to GDP has remained largely stable in recent years, as opposed to the continuous decline in the past 2 decades. There have also been voices from the industry indicating that industries in Hong Kong are not limited to traditional manufacturing and should include supporting services for the manufacturing sector. This new and broader perspective would better reflect the industry's contribution to Hong Kong's economy. They also express interest in investing in smart production, and friends from the industry have been proactively upgrading their existing production lines. So we have been working closely with the industry so as to understand the latest development of the manufacturing industry. And in the recent years, there are a lot of friends from the industry who expressed interest in investing in the establishment of a new production line. This shows that we are on the right track, and the achievements have gradually emerged. As the development of various land sites and facilities for supporting reindustrialization are in the pipeline, we can foresee that development of reindustrialization will continue to gain traction. We remain open to the suggestion of drawing up a target for the manufacturing sector's contribution to GDP, and will also look into further measures. The National 14th Five-Year Plan and the development of the Greater Bay Area provide Hong Kong with endless opportunities. We will continue to work in close collaboration with the industry, the academia, and research institutes to proactively integrate Hong Kong into national development and enhance our work in the promotion of I&T and reindustrialization. Thank you. Mr. Holden Chow, President. The second AMC. Of course, we hope that it will be established in Yunlong and Hung Shui Kiu so as to create local employment. I hope the Secretary have heard our view. Well, I'm glad to hear that there are about 60 semiconductor companies in Hong Kong, setting up in Hong Kong. And it is actually feasible for these kind of manufacturers to to conduct their work in Hong Kong. Well, the contribution of manufacturing sector to the GDP, the government reply says that they are open to that, but there's no timetable for that. I'd like to ask, will the future Innovation and Technology and Industry Bureau consider setting up this kind of benchmark, that is, the contributions of the manufacturing industry and other industries could be grouped together so that we can have a look at the percentage of the contribution of manufacturing sector to local GDP. Yes, Mr. Chow is correct. When there is a will, there is a way. So reindustrialization of Hong Kong is actually something that we have started, and actually we are gaining traction. And we can see that our industrialists and also research institutes have their strengths and they have potential as well. That's why in the past, we have been working towards that direction. For instance, in the Yunlong Semiconductor Center, the government is putting in a lot of resources so as to help the further development of these industries. Well, Mr. Zhao also points out that in the future, we should consider whether we need to set down a bench line, for instance, about the contribution of manufacturing industry to GDP. Well, in the past, basically, the contribution comes from manufacturing. But then friends of the industry have reminded us that, well, industry-related services should also be regarded as a kind of industry, and their contribution should also be included. So in order to better or more accurately reflect the contribution of industries to GDP, they have worked out a report in collaboration with Hong Kong U, and they suggested that we should put group together the industry-related services into the contribution of industry or in Hong Kong, in the GDP of Hong Kong. So we are now working on this. We are trying to see how we could expand the scope so as to more accurately reflect the contribution of the industries to local GDP. Once again, I'd like to thank Mr. Chow. It is very important that we should have a clear target and goal in order to facilitate our work. But in the meantime, we have to listen to the views of the people of the industry, especially from the manufacturing industries and the industrialists, so that we will know how to work out our plan. Mr. Sunny Tan. Thank you, President. And I'd like to thank Mr. Chow for his concern about the development of our industry. And in addition to value-added industry, in fact, Hong Kong has a lot of very high-quality traditional industries, for instance, textile and garment industries. The R&D, design, promotion, and also tax works have all been conducted in Hong Kong. And Hong Kong-financed industries actually have played a very important role to the Asia-Pacific supply chain. Well, regarding the reorganization of government structure, well, I have been looking very attentively on this because actually we have a lot of industries such as textiles and garment industry. We do have R&D centers. We have Create Hong Kong, etc. But then all these schemes are grouped under different departments and bureaus. So I'd like to ask, after reorganization of the government structure, how is the government going to group these resources together so that there will be better integration and they could better help Hong Kong finance manufacturers and industrialists to do a better work and have better business? Thank you, Mr. Tan, for your question. Well, actually, Mr. Tan has been very active and in putting forward valuable advice to us. And we also have liaised with people of the various industries, for instance, in garment and textile industries. And they have come up with very constructive advice to us. As rightly pointed out by Mr. Tan, Hong Kong textiles industry is playing a very important role in the global textile industry. And it has also contributed to a major part or significant portion in the economic growth of Hong Kong. So in fostering smart production, we have to consider, of course, how other industries or other traditional industries, such as textile industries, can also benefit. Mr. Tan asked how we could integrate the work of different government departments and also make better use of the resources so as to foster development of the industry of Hong Kong. The government has put in resources and is very supportive in the development of the various industries in Hong Kong. We have different R&D institutes and also supporting organizations who chip in their help. With the development of the Innovation, Technology and Industry Bureau, we will try to see how I&T could support the development of industry in Hong Kong. We would also look into the various organizations, both inside and outside of the government, so as to gather their strengths together so as to give full support to the industry of Hong Kong. And I'm sure that after the reorganization of government structure, we will come back and we will try to contact people from various sectors and see how we could work better to integrate our work and our efforts to support your development. Mr. Martin Liu. President, reindustrialization scheme is to support the establishment of smart manufacturing production lines in Hong Kong on a matching grant basis. So this is a very important measure to support the development of the smart production line. But then there are only 36 applications received since it started this commencement 2 years ago, and the supporting fund is less than $200 million. There has been criticism from the industry saying that the application procedures is very complex and time-consuming. I'd like to ask if the government would have the plan to review the situation and see whether application could be streamlined and promotion could be stepped up so that more companies, especially the small and medium enterprises, would benefit from the scheme. Thank you for your question. Regard not only reindustrialization, in fact, we are providing different support on different fronts. For instance, talent pool, and also we are seeking help from organizations both within and outside of the government so as to support the development of industries in Hong Kong. Regarding reindustrialization scheme, which was started about 2 years ago, actually with a short span of 2 years, we now have 37 applications in total. Among them, actually 33 have been completed. We have put in give out subsidies for 28 applicants or applying companies. The funding scope is a little bit short of $200 million, and the private investment is over 500 million. So as a new scheme, it is able to attract more than 30-something applications. And this is really something very impressive, especially when the industrialists, our local industrialists, are facing a lot of challenges, especially in face of the pandemic. I think this scheme really shows that it is very welcome among the industrialists, and the result has been very encouraging. Of course, with the ease of the pandemic, Hong Kong has to position ourselves for a reboot of our economy. With the support of the central government, we're very confident that we'll be able to revitalize our industry. And we will continue to listen to the views from the sector and to see how we could improve our work. We have actually made some adjustments and refinement to the various schemes after listening to your views. Our ultimate aim is to let applicants obtain the grants or subsidies as soon as possible. Of course, in the past, the application process may be cumbersome. We have tried to streamline it, and our ultimate goal is to help the industrialists so that they can get the subsidies and the funding support as soon as possible. Mr. Lam Kin Fong. Thank you, President. The world is changing very rapidly, and it is very important for us to keep advancing ourselves. Our sector has been all along been supportive to the reindustrialization of Hong Kong. Well, today the General Chamber of Commerce of Hong Kong and other organizations actually have put out similar suggestions. We have been looking into how innovation and technology could support the development of industry. Of course, infrastructure-led approach should be should continue to be stressed, and we should also make good use of land. At the same time, we should attract talents to come to Hong Kong from mainland and overseas. The government should provide the basic infrastructure and the services required so that Hong Kong can be well poised for a reindustrialization. Thank you, Dr. Lam, for your reminder. We have, in order to promote reindustrialization, infrastructure and other services are prerequisite. Of course, we have to have those in place. In the policy address of this year, as you can see, we have unprecedentedly injected a lot of resources in the development of innovation and technology. Let me cite an example. Ms. Lam talked about the land for INT. Now it's about 340 hectares. There are 253 hectares developed and 89 hectares planned to be developed. In the policy address of this year alone, the Northern Metropolis and related districts, we will, in addition, inject 250 hectares of land for the development of innovation and technology. This will be in different districts. We have the Tolo reclamation projects and also the Lau Fao Shan scientific park, and all these are to help reindustrialization of Hong Kong. And these are the infrastructures in place. We will continue to work hard on that.
Government Bill, first reading. Inland Revenue Amendment Tax Sections for Domestic Rents Bill 2022. Second reading. Secretary for Financial Services and the Treasury. President, I move the second reading of the Inland Revenue Amendment Tax Sections for Domestic Rents Bill 2022. The bill seeks to implement the proposal in the 2022-23 budget to allow tax deductions for domestic rents so as to ease the burden of taxpayers liable to salaries tax and tax under personal assessment who are not owners of domestic properties. We hope the bill could be passed in this council before the summer recess this year, so that the proposed measure could be implemented from the year of assessment YA 2022-23. According to the proposal in the bill, the rent paid in a YA by a person or by the person's spouse who is not living apart from the person as a tenant or by both of them as co-tenants under a qualifying tenancy of domestic premises is allowable for deduction. The relevant premises must be the taxpayer's principal place of residence and the tenancy entered into must have been stamped. The proposed maximum amount of deduction is $100,000 for each YA. There is no limit for the entitlement period. The measure is expected to benefit about 340,000 taxpayers with foregone tax revenue of about $3.3 billion per year. To ensure the measure is targeted to benefit taxpayers who are the most in need and to forestall tax abuse, avoid double tax benefits, and prevent tax avoidance, the bill provides for circumstances in which deduction is not allowed, including the person or the person's spouse who is not living apart from the person is a legal and beneficial owner of any domestic premises in Hong Kong. 2. The landlord or principal tenant of the rented domestic premises is an associate of the person or the person's spouse. Example, the landlord is the person's spouse or a parent, child, sibling, or partner of the person or the person's spouse. 3. The person or the person's spouse who is not living apart from the person is provided with a place of residence by his or her employer. 4. The person or the person's spouse who is not living apart from the person is a tenant or authorized occupant of a public rental housing flat. 5. The rented premises are not allowed for residential use or the tenancy is prohibited under any law or a government lease. Or 6. The person or person's spouse has entered into a lease purchase agreement in respect of the premises concerned with the landlord. The amount of deduction allowable to a taxpayer is the amount of rent paid under the tenancy in relation to the YA or the deduction ceiling for the tenancy for the YA, whichever is less. The bill also provides for detailed deduction rules to cover various circumstances such as more than one tenancy is involved in a YA or the total amount of deduction allowable to a married person or the person's spouse who is not living apart from the person is exceeded and so on. On the deduction ceiling, if there is more than one tenant under the tenancy, the maximum amount of deduction will be reduced in proportion to the number of co-tenants. If the period of the tenancy in a YA is less than 12 months, the maximum deduction will be reduced in proportion to the period of the tenancy that overlaps with the YA. Eligible taxpayers may provide information about their domestic rent paid or payable in relation to YA 2022-23 in the 21 to 22 tax returns to be issued this June. After the passage of the bill, the Inland Revenue Department, IRD, will take into account the deduction in the computation of the 2020-23 provisional salaries tax. President, we have already issued a paper to the Council to explain the bill in detail. IRD has already uploaded to its website explanations on the proposed tax deductions for domestic rents, which include the deduction rules and frequently asked questions for taxpayers' reference. The proposed reduction measures could ease the tax burden of eligible taxpayers. I hope members will support the passage of the bill for the early benefit of taxpayers. I so submit. Thank you, President. And I propose a question to you, that the aforesaid bill be read the second time. In accordance with the rules of procedure, the second reading debate is adjourned and the bill is referred to the House Committee. Members' motion with no legislative effect. Mr. Vincent Chang will move a motion on formulating policy and development blueprints on arts and culture for the next 5 years. 6 members will move amendments to the bill. This council will proceed to a joint debate on the motion and the amendments. Later, I will first call upon Mr. Vincent Chang to speak and move the motion. Then I will call upon Mr. Kenneth Fok, Dr. Stephen Wong, Mr. Yu Pak Leung, Mr. Sunny Tan, Mr. Ma Fong Kwok, and Mr. Lee Chen Kang to speak in sequence, but they may not move the amendments at this stage. The joint debate now begins. Members who wish to speak, please press the request to speak button. And I'll call upon Mr. Vincent Chang to speak and move the motion. Thank you, President. I move that the motion as printed on the agenda be passed. That is, formulating policy and development blueprints on arts and culture for the next 5 years. The new chief executive has been elected. The new government will soon be taking office. We very much look forward to the government structure reorganization, including the establishment of the Culture, Sports and Tourism Bureau. That's something we've been looking forward to for a long time. In fact, over a decade ago, there was talk about setting up a separate culture bureau, but it's never happened. And on arts and cultural development, I hope the government will try to catch up with especially with software for culture and also there should be much faster development. And then more importantly, in the 14th five-year plan, Hong Kong is to be developed into a East West Center for International Cultural Exchange. So we've been given a mission. And that's why I've asked the government today to formulate a development blueprint for the next 5 years. I would like to listen to members' views in a moment so that the government could make reference to members' views. And I've actually prepared a proposal on arts and culture up to 2027, and then I will also listen to members today, and then I will consolidate our views and put them into this proposal for submission to the government. Now, on development blueprint on arts and culture, that's really to promote a better understanding of arts and culture among the public, including Chinese culture. And also, we could also build a bigger audience with such development, and then with more practitioners, and then we could provide more job opportunities to practitioners. And more importantly, we want arts and culture industries could become an important growth point in our economy. That is the KPI for arts and culture policy. Now we want to develop arts and culture in a place, then we could lead the trend, and then we could bring people together, and then there would be better cultural identity among the public and better confidence among the public too in arts and culture development. Now, it's been said that arts and culture development must be led by the relevant industry. So we need to develop our cultural and creative industries. We need to build Hong Kong brands, and then Hong Kong could become an East meets West Center for International Cultural Exchange. I'm sure you'll agree that's the way to go. Now, yesterday we visited the Hong Kong Palace Museum yesterday. It's to be open in July. We were very excited at the visit. We really look forward to the opening of the museum. In fact, other facilities in the whole of the West Kowloon will soon be renewed. And we have the relevant cultural facilities, we have the best talents too, so we do have the strength in arts and cultural development. But for various reasons, the government has not formulated any visions and long-term objectives for arts and cultural development in Hong Kong. Now, we are to be positioned as the East meets West Center for International Cultural Exchange, so it's time for us to boost our development, and then we could contribute to the global influence of Chinese culture. We could tell a proper Hong Kong story and China story. Now, arts and culture, of course, cover many aspects, visual arts, performing arts, publication, and so on, cultural services, and then arts that includes comics, arts pieces, and so on and so on. Now, of course, some time ago, I invited members and others to find out more about the development of the sector, and some suggestions have been made. For example, we could strengthen our cultural and arts, strengthen our cultural industrial development, and then we could promote strengthen cooperation exchange with the mainland, especially GBA, and then we could promote Chinese culture, foster local arts and cultural activities, strengthen arts and cultural education, better conserve and promote our tangible and intangible cultural heritage and so on. But because of limited time, I will focus just on a few points. First, now I've looked at the distribution resources of the government in various arts and culture sector. For example, in 2021 to 22, the government committed $5.7 billion. And then in the past few years, it's been more or less the same amount. But then most of the funding goes to public performing arts venues, library facilities and activities, and expos and so on. But then about subsidizing the major performing arts groups, it's just $400 million. And then there are some 300 other cultural and arts groups. The funding for them is just $100 million. So it's really small compared to, it's a small amount compared to the $5.7 billion. So we need to make the cake bigger. And then we should give more opportunities for all the performing arts groups. They shouldn't be competing for all the same source of funding. So I think it's important to review the funding arrangement. Now, on the mainland and Taiwan, they have different cultural funds for specific purposes. For example, in Macau, there is a fund for development of projects and then others and for other aspects as well. So they have different funds to promote the development of different sectors. Second is about cultural consumption vouchers. That's what I'm proposing. There should be a proper funding mechanism. The government should set up a commission on cultural industry so that there would be precise planning of promotion of the development of arts and culture and the creative industries. And then during the COVID-19 epidemic, many of the arts and cultural venues were closed, so there's a loss of practitioners. Now, so people have done a lot, but it's not enough because it's really tough to keep going. So could you give them more support? Some groups are saying, say for Cantonese opera, this morning we went to the Cantonese Opera Center. Is the venue cost rental too high? Although you say you have reduced the rent, so you need to give them more support. And then in the past year or two, now we've been issuing electronic consumption vouchers. How about using part of that for promoting the cultural sector? For example, out of $10,000, $1,000 or $2,000 will be spent on, say, going to performances, say to ballet performance and whatever. So could you consider it? And then today, there's talk about whether there should be admission fees to the Hong Kong Palace Museum. So it's something we should consider. And then outside of Hong Kong, there are many arts and cultural groups that are doing really well in Asia and in the international arena. There's room for further development. For example, the film industries and the music sector. We've seen good examples. you see that singers from Hong Kong doing well outside of Hong Kong, say on the mainland, and in GBA there is a television program which is really successful. It's a joint production with a mainland TV station. It's got high ratings and so on. And also many of the Hong Kong films are doing well. They have won many awards overseas. So apart from local development, how can we support all these practitioners to come out of Hong Kong and develop further, say in GBA and so on? Apart from that, of course, we have to talk about Chinese culture and our cooperation with GBA. In 2020, the country published the 5-year plan for development of cultural industry, and there are various festivals and the Youth Music Festival and so on. So I think we should strive for more such performances to be held in Hong Kong. And then we could bring people from GBA to come to Hong Kong. We hope that after the resumption of normal travel, when the express rail line resumes service, then people could go to Kai Tak Sports State Park for international events, and also to the West Kowloon Cultural District for performances and so on. Next, I want to talk about the West Kowloon Cultural District and the facilities there. I think the West Kowloon Cultural District is somewhere people should visit because so much resources have been plowed into that. Now, the CE-elect has also said that he hopes to turn West Kowloon Cultural District as a cultural hub for the entire country. So for the Hong Kong Palace Museum, I hope the government will lead the successful development of this project. And then I know there will be collaboration with other places around the world. I hope more people will come to know about the Hong Kong Palace Museum here. Now, I've not been much involved in arts and cultural development, but then for those who are committed, they are in good numbers and they're doing really well. And then there are many young people too who are keen to join this sector. So I think the government and this council should help to promote such development. So I hope you will all support my motion. I'll be listening very carefully to the views of members. Thank you. I now put the question to you, propose the question to you that Mr. Vincent Zhang's motion be passed. Mr. Kenneth Kwok.
President, let me declare my interest. I am a board of director of the West Kowloon Cultural District Authority, and it is important for Hong Kong to formulate a 5-year development plan for the arts and culture in Hong Kong. So I'd like to thank Mr. Cheng for moving this motion. And this is really a very good chance for us to discuss this issue. Well, I have made some points of amendment. First, about digitization. Well, this is a trend, a global trend. In the 14th 5-year plan of the country, it is clearly stated that we have to foster development of digitization. And for the 2020 policy address of the chief executive, the government also mentions that it will support further development of the digitization of the sector. And they have put in specified fund to support the development. But then just providing funding support or giving venue accessibility would not be adequate. And it is not enough to foster digitization of the entire sector. In the 13th 5-year plan, the mainland cultural ministry already has laid down a kind of establishment of a digitized platform to support the development of the sector. So in order to transform the sector, we have to add a bit more effort. For instance, some people may videotape a performance and then put it online. Is this enough? Is this digitization of the arts and culture industry? I don't think so. I think we have to have other support as well. We have to enhance audience participation and also enhance their experience. So in formulating the roadmap, we have to consider how to come up with a comprehensive enhancement of the ecosystem of the arts and cultural sector. We also have to help the practitioners to transform themselves in conducting the work as well. Second, we have to protect IP and industry, because this is very important to support arts and culture. We need a IP protection in order to encourage people to continue to work in this field and to continue to create, and also to entice people to come to Hong Kong. Hong Kong is a kind of service hub for different IP rights, and we also are in a well position to form ourselves as a kind of transaction center for different IP exchanges. And this could be another engine of growth for Hong Kong's economy. We will also very soon amend the legislation on trademarks and copyrights. So actually there are a lot of loopholes right now. We should make use of that opportunity to look at how we could plug all those loopholes in the legislation. So I suggest that in our entire blueprint, we have to add one point, that is, we should continue to look into how we could step up with the protection of IP rights in Hong Kong, and we should actually play a leading role in this field, for instance, for AI and other areas as well. Number 3, to assist different brands entering into mainland markets, we have to tell our story well. Well, Hong Kong as a place where East meets West, I think this is actually our ultimate goal, is to tell our story well and tell the Hong Kong story and the Chinese story well. That we have people or offices established in Hong Kong. In the policy address, it is mentioned that the overseas commerce and economic offices should play a bigger role in fostering exchange and also activities in Hong Kong. Well, because of the interest of time, I will end here. I think we have to also assist the country to let out its soft power to the global arena. We have to work closely with our mainland enterprises as well, and also support that this 5-year plan will be just a beginning. We should continue to showcase to the world that we are a place where East meets West, and we are in a good position to establish a comprehensive cultural policy. I would like to have your support on my amendment. Dr. Stephen Wong. Thank you, President. I agree to what Mr. Cheng and Mr. Fogg have mentioned. That is the importance of setting a blueprint for the development of art and culture in Hong Kong. Well, this is especially important to promote the healthy development of our ecosystem, so that we can attract talented people and young people to come to join the sector. And we should also create a bigger stage for the practitioners of this field. As regards ecosystem, it involves different aspects, including nurturing of talents, attracting of manpower. There should be also